1492. A year we all learned about in grade school. What we didn't learn about so much was what was happening before that date. People have lived in the Americas for thousands of years. Cultures have risen and faded away. Wars, famines, love stories and sagas, all before Christopher Columbus stumbled onto its shores. So why do we not hear these stories? Why do we know so little of the history of the New World? Maybe it's not so new after all. Join us now as we explore pre-Columbian American history. Welcome to Bermuda Boys.
Oh, it just cuts off. Okay, that's the end of that. Hey, hello, and welcome back to another great, riveting episode of the Bermuda Boys podcast. I'm Jack. Can you hear me?
Is this still playing? Oh, there we go. It was definitely still playing.
It was still playing?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. I don't know why, but all right. But I'm Jack.
And I'm Mike.
And we're the Bermuda Boys. And I know it's been a long time. Respectfully, life has gotten in the way a little bit. And, this is a hobby, so don't sue us. But we're back at it. We're back. We're here. We're going to finish up part 2 of our part 1 of the Primordial Americas. So... yeah, we're back to finish that. We're not going to leave you hanging. I know you all thought we were going to leave you hanging, but we're not going to leave you hanging. We're gonna finish this out. We're going to talk about it, and we're going to get to the bottom of some things. Probably not. I mean, we'll get to the bottom, but it's just going to be more mud and muck down there that we're going to have to sift through, and we're never going to actually get anywhere. But we're going to talk about it like we usually do. So
Lots of talking.
So I listened back a little bit earlier today to kind of get a feel of what we had already talked about on the previous episode because it had been so long since we recorded it. I had a general idea. I got about 10 minutes through it and I fell asleep. So
That's
and
what
I'm
we
hoping
do.
that's just
We put
because
people to sleep.
Yeah, I mean, why not? I mean, if we can provide a service, might as well. But I'm hoping that's just not like content wise. I'm hoping I was just tired, which is very possible because I've been extremely busy and I'm getting old. So physically, I was just exhausted. Mentally, pretty close to it as well. So hopefully, it wasn't just the content of the episode because I thought it was good stuff. I mean, I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's the sultry sounds of your deep baritone voice that did it.
Well, I'd be putting myself to sleep all the time because it's even louder in my head than it is for everybody else. It just rattles around. I don't have anything in there to stop it. So it's just like bouncing out. It's like this closet that I'm in now. It echoes. I got to actually put some clothes in here to dampen the sound a little bit. But I've got a new studio now. I'm not in the Airstream anymore, as Mike liked to call it, my Airstream.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not in that anymore. So I've got an actual studio, but it's not my kitchen. So it's just crammed into this tiny little hot box closet because I don't have air conditioning in here. I'm gonna have to figure out something with that. But anyway, that doesn't pertain to anything that we're actually going to talk about on this episode. But I just figured I'd put some background out there if it sounds like I'm echoey or if there's weird noises or something because of my neighbors upstairs flush the toilet. It's right above me. So hopefully they're in bed and they don't have an enlarged prostate. We'll find out. So stick with us, and I know it's riveting.
The suspense
exciting.
is killing me.
You don't know when that toilet's gonna flush, and it is loud too. So hopefully they don't. But back to it. I didn't like.
So
I remember
what is our topic for today?
Well, it's the same as before, but it's a little bit different. Like when we talked about this on the last episode, we talked more about more ancient, way back when, like the possibility that people had been in North and South America long before we've been taught, and the evidence of that is very not necessarily really astounding, but very heavy, very noticeable. Yet,
and growing.
like, yeah, yet they don't want to push that narrative. They want to stick with the narrative that they have, that people have only been here for 6 to 10,000 years, and civilization here in the Americas has been relegated just to the Incas, the Aztecs, and the Mayans. And then there were just warring tribes, is what they try to teach us. But I think we touched on it pretty good and established that that is not the case, and it was not the case. And I think we're going to move forward a little bit in time, and we're still going to stick with the pre-Columbian experience, I guess, because nobody cares about Columbus anyway. It's not like he discovered anything. I mean, there's already people here. You can't discover something that people already are at. It's like me walking into my neighbor's house and being like, wow, I didn't know this was here. I found this.
Yeah, it says a little bit more about what Italy and Spain and Portugal at the time didn't know about the world than it does say anything about, like, him discovering something new. Like, it's been there and going on. In fact, as we'll talk about, there was some stuff that was more intense than Europe at the time. So,
there's a whole set of history that we don't really have. Stories and wars and battles and factions and all that going on that we don't really have. It's been lost to time because they didn't write it down. And if they did, well, it's been destroyed. So there's a whole lot here that we just don't know, and we probably never will, unfortunately. It's kind of like when the Great Library of where was it, like Alexandria or something, burned, and we lost so much, like history and everything that of even on the European side and the African side, that we don't know anymore because of that. But here in North America and South America, we lost a lot of that information because of conquerors. Manifest destiny and whatnot. Well, it's like, oh, well, this is free real estate, and we're just going to come in and take it because these people, it's not that they weren't putting up a fight, they just weren't as advanced in technology or health. Well, they were more advanced in health, but they haven't experienced an actual disease. So when our dirty white asses came over there, bringing all of our diseases and rats and pigs and whatnot, we decimated their numbers and made them easier to conquer. And
well, let's back up to the beginning. So do a little definition of terms. What does pre-Columbian mean? Like, what time is pre-Columbian and what time is post-Columbian, so we can put it into a historical context for listeners.
All right. Okay, fair. Well, I would assume, because everybody knows the old saying, 1492 Columbus sailed the ocean blue or something like that. Everybody kind of knows that saying. So 1492 is a date that will live in infamy, because that's the date that Columbus sailed from Spain to, was it Spain or did he sail from Italy?
He was Italian, but he sailed from
he sailed from Spain because he was sponsored by the Queen of Spain at the time, I believe. But he sailed his 3 ships out there and ended up landing in what would now be the West Indies. and near Cuba. Hispaniola, as they called it,
Mm-hmm.
in 1492. So anything prior to 1492 would be considered pre-Columbian. So 1491 and down,
Mm-hmm.
or back, I guess, would be considered pre-Columbian, and everything after they set foot in North America would be post-Columbian, which I don't think anybody uses that term because I've never heard it. It sounds kind of weird. Doesn't really roll off the tongue very well, but I don't know. We're not that type of show, so we're not going to get into that.
Yeah.
But when Columbus landed, they had no idea that there were going to actually be people here. What he was trying to do, as we all know, we've heard this story, was that he was trying to find a route to India to get spices and whatnot. But instead of sailing around, what was that? Where it's in South Africa now, I guess, Cape.
Oh yeah, sailing around the Horn. Yeah.
Yeah, Cape Horn. Yeah.
So, or is it the Horn or Cape of Good Hope? I think it's Cape of Good Hope, actually.
I don't know.
The one in
Oh, the
yeah, one
Horn,
in
I
South
think, is
Africa,
out
whichever
by-
one it is.
That's below the Red Sea, I think. That's
Yeah.
because it looks like a horn coming off the backside of Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Africa's backside.
But yeah, so he was looking for a shortcut to India because Portugal already had a massive monopoly on the one going east, or well, I guess south and then east around the bottom of Africa, because they had since like I think the late 1300s, the Portuguese had been like expanding as Europe's number one trade empire, or maybe I wouldn't call it an empire, like a corporation or something. I don't know, like what you would call it, but they
shipping
were
back then. That's pretty much what it was. It was like or a country sanctioned corporation.
yeah.
Like the
And,
Dutch had.
I mean, they
just
were
this
all
huge-
over the place. They had little trading colonies in the Philippines, in Japan. I mean, far away, and they would go in these little shorter journeys from like so Portugal and then down to West Africa, and then from there was a route from West Africa down to South Africa, and then there's another route that went from South Africa to, and they just had these little spots, these little trading ports all along the way. And they'd set up what was it called? Basically a trading post. Factory, that's what they called it.
Yeah.
They would set up a factory, which was basically a trading post, and they'd trade whatever kind of 2-bit dollar store stuff they brought from Portugal to get ivory and silk and beeswax and all kinds of stuff.
So pretty much what China does now. Like, times really haven't changed much. I mean, they just they send all of their Temu and Wish shit over here, and then they get all that sweet American currency back. So, yeah.
I mean,
it hasn't
it's
really
a good
changed.
business model. I
Yeah,
suppose.
I mean, if it works. if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right?
Yeah. So
But
Spain was going, we want a little piece of that action. I wonder if we could cut out the middleman, because we're having to pay such a high markup to these Portuguese traders and everything. So I wonder if the Spanish crown could just straight up own a route that goes straight to the silk and turmeric place, and we can get our cinnamon without the markup. And freaking Christopher Columbus comes along, and he's like, "Whoa, I mean, technically you could just sail the other way. The world's round, right?" And thought he'd try
I mean,
it.
that's thinking outside of the box right there. Especially back in that time.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, have you guys ever thought about just, hey, let's go this way instead of that way?
Yeah.
Like, what could happen? We're going to fall off the world or what? And a lot of people did think they were going to. Like, that there was nothing out that way. It was just a vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, and nobody had ever really gone there. Because
No, this was after Copernicus, wasn't it?
maybe, but, he wasn't very well received in his time either about the world being round. I mean, there's a lot of people nowadays that don't even believe that the world is round. It's ridiculous. We'll talk about that on an episode in the future. I want to touch on that for sure, definitely, but not today.
Yeah.
Not today. We don't have enough time.
So then 1492 and earlier would be the pre-Columbian period. And we talked a little bit about Columbus, but let's talk about the star of our episode, which is the pre-Columbian world that had been going on in a totally pre-Columbian way up until the Italian Spaniard guy showed up.
Yeah. Which I don't know if you've been living under a rock. I'm not talking about you, Mike, but just people in general out there. I don't know if they've been living under a rock for the past decade or so. But we used to have a Columbus Day. It has now been renamed Indigenous Peoples Day, which makes a lot more sense because why are we celebrating a genocidal mass murderer instead of the people that he mass murdered? So it makes more sense. We're flipping it around. We're giving people credit where credit's due now. And that's a good sign, I think, moving with the times. And, people can label me progressive or whatever, but I don't give a shit. They were here first, obviously. Mm-hmm. And I don't give you that crap that they lost. No, we were exposed to disease. So that's different. You put them on an even playing field, the Europeans would have gotten their asses handed to them. But
so in more ways than one, because there are a whole bunch of early accounts. I know we're getting into accounts after Columbus, but there was people who would go into these areas. I don't remember his name, but he was a Spaniard, and he did an entrada down through. I think he made it. He definitely made it through Alabama, and there was
Hernan Cortez.
There was a chief there that he described as like 8 feet tall. So I mean, these are tall, strong dudes. These are not.
Yeah.
They're not. I don't know, starving, scrapping. Whatever savages or whatever they wanted to call them or paint them as.
Yeah, they were definitely very, very well off physically. Great specimens of human beings. That's pretty much how they were described by a lot of the early explorers. Very, very defined physical features, muscular, tall. I guess you could say well-bred. I don't know. Genetically superior to Europeans at the time. Well, the majority of them, because Europeans had been through, they were just coming out of, at that time, like the bubonic plague, the second time it came around, stuff like that. So a lot of Europe had been wiped out. From an evolutionary standpoint, humans in Europe weren't very good physically. So they were very
not very
impressed
healthy
with
physically, probably not very healthy psychologically as well. If you look at the effects of living under serfdom, for example, where you're not even a person. You're like a topiary that's inherited with the land,
Yeah.
And
you're not even allowed to commit suicide.
Yeah.
Come on. Your life is so horrible that the only way out is to kill yourself, and they outlaw that too. Jeez. Laws, man.
We also have about this time in Europe, the pre-Columbian time, we have a new weird phenomenon. Now, I'm going to talk about it really briefly because I know we're supposed to be talking about pre-Columbian America. There was a strange phenomenon that occurred in Europe, which we call the Reformation, that started 1300s, moved into the 1400s, and that gave us something that we call Protestant humanism, which was starting to try to call into question these, yeah, we got serfs and we got aristocrats, but why? You know what I mean? Like, are humans valuable inherently, or are they chattel to just make me bread because I'm the knight, you know?
Yeah. And it was a lot of that mentality because of the people that ended up sailing over here. Columbus was actually a kind of rare example because he wasn't a major landowner or he wasn't a nobleman at the time. He was raised as a sailor, spent most of his early life as a sailor, working underneath somebody else. So by the time that it actually did come around, had worked his way up as a working man. So he wasn't like all the rest of the explorers that came after him that were noblemen or rich and well financed, had this mindset that people were beneath them, and especially people of color or of a new area were beneath them. They weren't considered human beings, and like you had described earlier, as savages. I mean, they literally were described that so many times as savages. And we just kind of marked it down over the years that they were unintelligent, easy to take over species, I suppose. Like, what was it? What's his name that took over the Incan city with like 14
Oh, Pizarro?
conquistadors? Yeah,
Yeah.
Francisco Pizarro just strolled right into one of the most heavily fortified cities of the Incans and took it over with 14 people because they were expecting peace. And it was just dirty tactics like that. And also firearms. Gunpowder was a huge deal, steel, and disease. And I think disease is probably the biggest one. So I think we'll go ahead and touch on that first and talk about disease. So pre-Columbian era of the Americas, we had huge cultures here, huge cities that rivaled the biggest cities of Europe at the time. We're talking
Yeah,
pretty much the same thing.
Cahokia was fairly close to the same population as Constantinople, which was the biggest city in Europe.
Yeah. And then you have, I always butcher the name of this, Tenochtitlan or whatever, I think.
Oh, yeah.
I always mess it up, but what's known as Mexico City now, back in the time was a huge city.
Yeah, it's still, by the way, Mexico City is the biggest city in the world.
Yeah, it's a huge, expansive a city.
Yeah.
And this city was built on a lake, like a swamp lake. And so they pretty much made the city into the lake. So they were doing huge engineering feats at a time that these, people would have been considered savages. And not only that, they were living a much healthier lifestyle. They were eating better foods. They were maintaining better societies because they were just better fed and taken care of by their governmental systems were nothing like we had in Europe. It was more free, depending on which civilization we're talking about. But when it came to like the indigenous people of North America, a lot of them were very, very democratic in their way of life. Would talk everything out and just, but good communication skills. But going, I don't know, I got a little off tangent again. What was that? Okay. Yeah. So, and say, the Aztecs had running water, like plumbing. So in Europe, you would just throw your shit bucket out the window and somebody would come by later and squeegee it up down the street.
The gong farmers is what they were called.
And that, of course, is going to, that type of lifestyle, it's going to breed disease. It's going to breed pestilence and just nasty living conditions. So a lot of the larger European cities at that time were just rife with just disease, horrible living conditions. People didn't really live past their mid-30s. Unless you had money, you didn't live very long. And so it was just terrible. And then on the complete other side of the world, you had cities that were clean, had running water. You know, there was no trash in the streets. Animals didn't just defecate everywhere. The people were clean. They bathed frequently, and they understood that that's why they got sick and whatnot. So disease wasn't really something that was very common in these areas of North and South America, and being locked away for so long from this side of the other side of the planet, they weren't exposed to it. I'm sure there were times before Columbus that people from Africa, Asia, or even Europe had gone into North and South America before, but it wasn't at the grand scale of just nasty Europeanness that that came later on after 1492. So inadvertently, these dirty Europeans come over with their diseases, their cholera and diphtheria and smallpox and plague and all that. They come over on their dirty rat-infested ships, and as soon as they set foot and they bring their equipment on shore and they're met by the natives of the area, those natives are exposed to these diseases. And they'd never been exposed to these diseases before. So, as we all know, because we just went through this ourselves for a few years there, starting around about 2020, how quickly a new disease can spread around the globe. Now imagine these diseases spread around the globe, but there's one section of the globe that's just closed off, and there's no contact with outsiders whatsoever for millennia. And this disease comes in. Their immune systems weren't prepared for this. Yes, they were healthy, they were in great shape, but their immune systems could not handle the type of diseases that these Europeans had been breeding in for 1,000 years. So,
yeah, so a lot of that has to do with type. There was certainly fairly equivalent number of diseases that were endemic to North and South America. It's just that they were different. They were separate. Like when you have, say, if you look at like a European robin versus an American robin, they've been separate so long, it's different species. So there's, with these diseases, there's different symptoms and different targeted immune responses. The European diseases have a lot to do with animal domestication, and so bringing in the animals into the house or into common contact with people exposed us to a lot of diseases that could have a higher frequency or a higher chance of becoming communicable from person to person. Like you can get something from an animal, but it has to mutate in order to go from person to person. Well, with the daily frequency of a direct contact with these domestic animals, like I'm talking cattle, horses, goats, birds like ducks and geese, and living with them and working with them on a daily basis for thousands of years, because the Neolithic is when we first started domesticating these guys, and that was 8,000 years ago, I think. So for 8,000 years, the Europeans and North Africans and Middle Eastern and all of them, they're in constant contact with these animals. Well, that means, yes, diseases spread, but we also developed a targeted immune response to the new disease. So something like chicken pox. You think about, I had chicken pox when I was a kid, and they basically just tell you, wait it out, and then you'll have immunity to it. And that was kind
Yeah.
of how these things worked. A lot of young kids got smallpox, and then once they'd finished their smallpox, they grew up. If they survived it, they grew up and they were immune to the smallpox. So, the typical diseases that the Europeans were constantly exposed to, they developed strong immunities to. Well, the way the settlement pattern and the extreme early date of the settlement pattern in Europe means that, in North and South America, means that, I think we talked about this in the last episode, but it is possible that dogs and gourds were brought along as domesticates from the old world. But even that, I think it's fairly shaky evidence. It's also possible that they domesticated local gray wolves and local gourds. But still, they're definitely not bringing goats and horses and cattle and chickens and geese and stuff. So
Not immediately.
What's
And
that?
They did. So not immediately. They did later on, like pigs and horses.
So the Europeans
are
did,
two
but
that
I'm
I
saying
know
that the
of.
Native Americans who were originally
you're
native
talking-
Siberians and moved
Yeah,
across the land
okay, all
bridge,
right, I see what
they
you're
didn't
saying.
bring any.
No, there are no known domesticable animals in North or South America that at any point in history that we know of. The closest thing
Well,
would
you got
probably
the
be the
llamas
llama
and
or the
alpacas.
alpaca. Yeah, but they still
Yeah.
weren't really fully domesticated. They were used as like a pack animal. They weren't used for meat. They weren't kept near the home. They weren't used as a food source.
Even then, if they were, they would have been presenting different diseases than the goats and the horses that the Europeans were exposed to get the smallpox and flu and all of that stuff that
Yeah.
wiped out large portions.
Yeah, that's true.
So there just was not a immune response that was adequate in the populations here in North America when they were faced with the new diseases. Or there was an immune response, because we obviously still have indigenous North and South Americans to this day.
Yeah.
It's just that it took longer than the death toll in order to adapt that immune response.
Yes. And that is the point that I'm getting to is pretty much as soon as Columbus set foot with his men into, I believe it was Cuba area, those diseases hit. And then, Columbus stayed there for a little while, mingled with the natives for a little while. And during that time, these diseases, people, they were starting to get sick. They didn't know what was going on. And with the trade routes the way that they were in North and South America, every culture pretty much communicated with all the other cultures. It spread like wildflowers. I was going to say wildflowers. Like wildfire under a heavy wind. It went very fast. So in the span of when Columbus first set foot to even so much as a decade later, the population of North and South America had dropped by almost 90% just because of disease. And so when Columbus first landed, there were these grand civilizations, these huge city areas, these large metropolitan areas of just masses of people grouped all over what would now be the United States and, down into Mexico and Central America, and then down into Northern and Western South America. Huge amounts of people. And by the time they came back again, a lot of those cities, grand cities that were there, were just small towns. So many
Mhm.
people had died off. There was just it all changed
Mhm.
pretty much, essentially, in an era standpoint, overnight. And that made it a whole lot easier for when we came back to conquer them. And by that point, we did understand that we were bringing the disease with us. We were figuring that out. So then that leads to the whole, well, we're going to trade things that we know diseases cling to. We didn't understand microbiology at the time, but we knew there was something. Like, we would give them this and they would get sick.
Mhm.
So disease became a major part of the conquering of these nations, long before biowarfare was even a thing, long before we knew what anthrax did, long before we knew any of these, you know, weaponized diseases that we have nowadays.
Mhm.
We understood that there was something going on, and we could make it easier for us. So
Mhm.
when we come back with our forces a few years later, the people that are left, well, they've been disbanded, they've been disoriented and disorganized, and their whole entire social structure has fallen apart because, well, they've lost so many people.
Mhm.
So it made it a whole lot easier for us with our slightly superior technology and tactics to come in and just wipe out what's left.
Mhm.
And I mean, I think a lot of people just don't really understand the scale of how many people died from this. And we're talking millions.
Mhm.
It's in the span of a very short amount of time. So you've got all these bodies piling up too, which is also going to spread disease.
Mhm.
And I think that a lot of people don't actually appreciate how many people were here because of that. Because then when the settlers and pioneers and whatnot were coming over, the explorers were coming over, they didn't see these massive cities. They didn't see any of this stuff because they'd been long abandoned by this point
Mhm.
because so many people had died. So they just assumed that these people were a savage culture, a warring tribal culture that, well, stood no chance against them. And there was no reason to even try to make peace or reason with them. We could just conquer them easier than trying to cohabit.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, so it set up a situation where uh, European peoples were coming in, and the European settlers and explorers and all of that. They weren't a what's the word I'm looking for? They weren't a coherent unit. Like, they weren't all communicating with each other. These are different nations. Even within different nations, there's different charter companies and all of that sort of thing. So they weren't all communicating with each other, but they would show up and they would encounter a landscape that was not the uh, state of the civilization whose um, empire they were moving into. They were encountering what is essentially the 1493 version of Mad Max universe, a post-apocalyptic wasteland where most of the people had died of something absolutely mysterious, and the manner of life that depended on the numbers and the social units and social interactions and the industries that kind of population could support just didn't have the same, without that manpower and without that infrastructure, that they didn't have the same thing. So they had to kind of abandon their civilized, settled life and start living closer to a frontier type life. It's closer to this post-apocalyptic survivalist kind of lifestyle. Now, that doesn't mean that they lost the ability to grow crops and things like that, because of course people showed up even as late as like the 1700s and encountered peoples who were still growing Of course, the Three Sisters, the famous, corn, beans, and squash,
Hmm.
that are unique crops to North and South America, as well as potatoes like Inca and stuff like that. But they definitely were not living with the same social stratified society and civilizations and empires in some case, like with the Aztecs and stuff. But that's a little bit about the state when the various explorers and settlers showed up. Should we talk a little bit about the state of the civilizations before Columbus?
I think we did kind of touch on it a little bit, but yeah, that's definitely kind of why we're here. Everybody knows pretty much what happened after Columbus landed here. It's taught in school. It's not the correct way that it's taught, but it's pretty much goes along the same lines. There were people here, we came, and now it's ours. But before that, it was a pretty big mystery because we didn't really get the chance to actually encounter or study a lot of these civilizations that had been here, because by the time we did get more into the interior of these areas, they had, like you had said, was already, and I like the way you described it, a Mad Max like dystopian apocalyptic world that makes perfect sense. And there were some that were trying to hold on to the vestiges of the civilizations that they had, like the Incas, the Aztecs, still trying to hold on to what they had when Europeans first encountered the natives of the area. They didn't understand what was going on. So yeah, their society was crumbling afterwards, but before that, they were some of the most advanced societies that the world had ever seen up to that point. Like I'd mentioned earlier, their trade networks, their diplomacy with other people in the area. It's wars weren't as common as they were made out to be. They were largely peaceful trading, whatever they had. I mean, you're finding like pumpkin seeds in South America, and they only grow in northern climates.
There were special shells that only come from mollusks around my neck of the woods on the Pacific Northwest coast that were found in the Mississippi River Delta. So obviously, their trade networks are going
I mean,
wild.
and you have like obsidian arrowheads, and obsidian is only mined around in like Wyoming and Idaho and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Out all the way out east, and you're finding obsidian arrowheads in Maine and stuff like that, all mined from this one area.
Mm-hmm. And so when we go back to the Portuguese, like, oh, it's so cool that they made it all the way to Japan. It's not that cool. I mean, North America is pretty huge, and there was trading networks and trading. I mean, dare I compare it to the Silk Road? Like you got goods going all over.
If you think about it, you have Alaska, which is not only just like the largest state in the United States, it's also like almost the same size as Europe, like continental Europe. So you've got this just
Is it that
Alaska is a huge landmass. And then you have Canada, which is the second largest country in the world. It's huge, just massive area that people were traversing across. And you look at it on a map, and it's very not. It just doesn't look like it would be that big, but just the scale of it is massive. So they've, of course, we're setting up trade routes and whatnot between each other that really rivaled what the Romans had done in Europe and North Africa. So if you think about it now, a lot of our roads, like our main byways and whatnot that go from town to town here in the United States, were pretty much laid down on roadbeds and pathways that had been created by the indigenous people for thousands of years. They all followed these same roads. Our main highway system pretty much follows the roads that were already there. These were already cut and cleared, well-worn paths by the time we got here to build our roads. So, unless you're in one of those areas that just builds everything in a ridiculous grid pattern, obviously that wasn't it. But, we have roads that are just windy, just going through wherever, and it looks like it should follow the course of the terrain, but it does not. And the indigenous people were following game. Bison used to roam all the way from the West Coast all the way to the East Coast before Columbus. I mean, we're talking millions of these animals, and this was one of their main sources of food in North America, was the American bison. And they their range stretched all the way out to the East Coast. You had bison in South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, herds of them. And these people would follow them around because they're migratory animals. So the bison had these trails, caribou and elk, and I guess they're the same thing.
Nah, caribou's not the same.
No, caribou's the same thing as a
reindeer.
reindeer. Yeah, elk is just a giant deer.
Yeah.
Elk herds were very prominent all the way down into the southeastern United States too, and they would follow them around, migrate around with them for thousands of years. So they're wearing out all these paths and trails, and not to mention clear cutting, like pretty much taking down all the trees, because where do buffalo love to live? On like wide open areas. They don't live in the forest, so you get rid of the trees, the buffalo will come there and they will graze and do whatnot. So it makes it easier to get to them. So a lot of the eastern seaboard had already been cut of its timber by the time the first Europeans landed here, because, well, the indigenous people were doing, I guess, what would be the equivalent of controlled burns now. They used to just light an entire area on fire and just let it burn through.
Yeah, they
And-
did that really systematically too. So they got to have a field, right? And they can only plant the field for maybe like 10 years or whatever around their settlement. So then they got to move their settlement. So they'd go out and they'd identify a new place that they want to put their settlement, and they'd have the trees. They'd ring the bark on the trees so that
Yeah.
it would kill off the trees in that area, and then they'd get, oh well, we're getting pretty close to time to move in, so they just burn everything out in there. And now they've got an area, it's already prepped. You got good carbon all in the soil for good growing, charcoal or whatever. And they also did yearly burns like you're describing. They'd go into an area, they'd do it a bit at a time. They didn't just light random fires around. They would go like, okay, so it's this certain hunting field that we're going to burn out this year, and then next year we're going to burn out that field, and then the next year. And they'd go around and do it very, very systematically, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah. And so obviously after Europeans landed and the disease wiped out so many of them, they weren't able to keep up with this type of thing going through the future. So when the Europeans actually did start to colonize over here in North and South America, it looked completely different. Forests had grown, and it made it look like new virgin country. The roadways were still there because they'd been walked on so much and hard packed so much that nothing was able to grow on it. So a lot of the roadways were still there, which made it so easy for the first Europeans coming over to make it further into the interior. There was already a road system. So they didn't have to bushwhack their way through these forests. They could just walk. And then they could bring their wagons and carts and animals just straight into the interior quickly. And because all the infrastructure was already there. And we're taught that it wasn't. We're taught that it was just virgin land with a few tribes of people just here and there smattering the countryside, and they were easily conquerable because they were warring factions with each other. But like we had mentioned in our part 1 episode, you had like the Iroquois Federation and things like that, where you had multiple different tribes all grouped together as one. But yes, they all had their own governing set of laws, their own little cities. It was more like city-states. But they were very cohesive, and they weren't warring with each other really until the Europeans showed up and pitted them against each other. But again, I'm going to have to digress off of this again because I still want to touch on this. Essentially, terraforming is what a lot of the indigenous cultures were doing on a scale that's unprecedented. It's never seen anywhere in the world, and like until we probably dug the Suez Canal.
So we think of with the way farming is done nowadays, and civilization runs on farms because you don't eat, you can't be around. So the way we do it now with the huge monocropped fields, and you plow the soil up and everything, not at all how things were done. So why till up a place and then plant a whole bunch of fruit trees in one place when you can just, there's fruit trees growing out there, you just go to the place where the fruit tree is, right? And then the way that the crops were planted. So one, Europeans didn't, I don't know, they forgot to mention, or maybe, I don't know. It wasn't in my school.
Selectively
up,
omitted,
but
is what I like to say.
The Native Americans did have agriculture, which is one of the major signs of civilization. They had huge fields of corn with beans and squash. Now, this was almost, the entire Atlantic seaboard, almost all of Mesoamerica. As you get further out west and you get into the buffalo hunting peoples, there's a little less corn as the further you go west, till you get to where I'm from, and basically they lived entirely on hunting and roots, a certain root called camas, I think. But anyways, my point is, I'm digressing now. My point is the way they did this, they didn't go out there and plow acre upon acre upon acre. They would dig a little hole where they wanted to put the corn or the bean or whatever, and then they would plant it right there. There's no need to pull out the weeds or anything. They kept stuff going that helped. So, for example, beans, we know they fix nitrogen. There's a lot of other plants that naturally grow around that either they provide some sort of, what is that called? A healing herb, basically. Medical benefit, or they added something to enrich the soil, or they were just there to create biomass so that there's a thick layer of natural fertilizer as those weeds grow and then die, and then more grow and then die. And so we tend to think of this idea of like a huge area that's plowed, and like all the dirt is turned over, exposed to the sunlight, all of the plants removed, so the sun then bleaches out anything that's any kind of like positive fungus or anything that helps the plants grow. These guys weren't doing that shit. They're like, no, the stuff that's growing here can help in some way with the pumpkin crop, and so we plant our pumpkins in amongst this. And very different way from how we think about agriculture. It's a smart way too, if you think about it. There's a lot less work if you don't have to plow all 47 acres to feed your village.
Yeah, and that is also a big thing about all of this is agriculturally they were way more advanced than anything that the Europeans or Middle Eastern civilizations had to offer. So if you look at what was going on in Europe and the Middle East and North Africa, all the like the cradle of civilization was all based around wheat. And it had been for thousands of years. And by the time that they went to North and South America, it was still wheat. So we'd been growing this same type of grain for thousands of years, and it hadn't really changed much because they didn't understand genetics really at the time. And then over on the other side of the world, you have, the native people over there took this grass and made it into the corn that we now know today. Like they bred it into existence. Beans, potatoes, tomatoes, all that was bred into existence by realizing which crop yield was better than the one before. Knowing where to grow it, how to grow it, and how to breed it. They were literally crossbreeding plants to improve yield, to improve flavor, size. I mean, we're talking the only grass native to the Americas is corn, and they made it grow from just a regular sized little grass that looks like a little wheat stalk all the way up to the 8-foot tall leviathans that we see nowadays.
Yeah.
Yielding
And
2 to 3
you've
heads
also
of
got
corn.
the fact that one wheat seed produces one wheat plant, which gives you maybe a few stalks, each one with 7 or 8 seeds each. A corn stalk, a single corn stalk, has several corn cobs on it, each one with how many hundreds of seeds. So your food that you're pulling out of what you're investing into the land is a much higher yield, like an insanely high yield. Plus
And
the fact
easier
that
to
corn at
sustain.
the time had a much higher protein and nutritional value than corn nowadays has, because of course we got the genetically modified corn.
Yeah. Well, everything is nowadays. I mean, if you think about
Yeah.
it. But then again, corn has always been genetically modified if you really want to go down that technical route, because
Yeah.
that's what the Native Americans had been doing for thousands of years, was genetically modifying their crops to make them better, to make them more disease resistant, bug resistant. They were highly advanced when it came to agriculture. Now, when it came to actual domestication of a meat source, not so much.
Hey, actually, I'm going to have to respectfully disagree there. Several tribes had a breed of meat dog, as well as there was domestication of turkeys in northern Mexico and southeastern United States, and potentially in the southeast. But then what was the other one? There's another. Fuck it, I don't remember. But there were a few domestic animals that they used for meat.
Yeah, I could see turkeys, actually. Yeah, I mean, turkeys are so widespread out here on the East Coast. I mean, there's got to be millions of them. I mean, you just drive down the road.
The other one was Pueblo people had pet parrots. They would import from not South America, from Mexico. But that wasn't for meat. That was because they're pretty.
Well, I mean, if it came down to a desperate situation, I'm going to draw the line at what's meat and what's friend. And everything's going to be friend or meat, all the friends. I mean, I'm going to draw it even on the other side of people.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm desperate enough, I'm going to eat a person. So I'm just saying, a pretty bird, that's going to go before I eat my neighbor. But once the pretty birds are gone, bye-bye neighbor. But anyway, that's not what we're talking about once again. But yeah, I mean, obviously there was a lot of different types of fruits and vegetables and grains. Well, corn, I guess, was the only grain that was here. Tobacco, major one. I mean,
That's not edible, though. I mean,
No,
I suppose it is.
well,
really
a lot of people put it
desperate.
in their mouth, but I don't think they really swallow it. But some crazy people do. And they have stomach issues. But I mean, if you think about it, like we can credit uh, indigenous peoples of North and South America with killing thousands of Europeans from like lung issues
Hmm.
for hundreds of years. So I guess in a sense they got him back a little bit.
So there's another fun theory regarding that. I don't remember which book I came across it in, but I think it was 1493. Was it 1490 called 1493 or I think it was called 1493.
Yeah, I think he had to triple it there. He had 1491, which was all about before Columbus, 1492, which was when Columbus was there, and then 1493 was
Yeah.
everything after.
So
They're really good
so
books
the
if you haven't
the
checked
one
them
that was
out.
after Columbus, that book detailed how it's possible that syphilis was derived from the mutation of a New World disease when it found European Old World hosts, and
Mm.
the New World disease was basically just impetigo. It wasn't like death by neurological degeneration, but
Your genitals
when
rotting off.
when
Ugh.
it went rampant in the old world, it turned into this horrible fucking zombifying, brain rotting venereal disease.
Yeah,
So that would
which
be a
people
good,
are gonna
you know,
spread because
Montezuma's revenge type of thing.
yeah, and I don't know, like it's a shame that a lot more of it didn't take off, but you know, especially I mean, what's a better way for like a culture that's coming in and raping and pillaging than to get a disease that after you rape somebody attacks your genitals and then your brain until you become just a blubbering mess and die. I mean, what better like
Like poetic justice.
yeah. I mean, think about it. You know, like, there were probably a lot of rapes that were prevented just because somebody was just about to, and it's like, oh, no, I was able to open that thing up, and dang, I ain't putting anything in there. So, you know, it probably did help them a little bit.
Well, no, that's what I'm
That's kind of
saying. Is
morbid
in
to think
the
about.
indigenous populations, it was nothing worse than like impetigo, which is basically just like a little like a mark or lump on your
Oh, yeah.
skin.
Yeah,
It
they've been
wasn't
dealing with
anything.
it. It's the same thing as the Europeans with their smallpox. Uh, yeah, along the same lines. I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
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 I gotcha. So, yeah. Yeah, that's a good comeback for him. But unfortunately, not on the scale that it needed to be because the influx of Europeans coming into North and South America eventually overran them over time anyway. So,
Mhm.
unfortunately, they weren't able to really just hold on, strike back. But that doesn't mean they didn't. You know, they did quite a bit. They knew that their land was being taken. They knew that they were being conquered. They fought like hell,
Mhm.
uh, especially out in the plains of North America. The the tribes of the plains really, 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 really fought the United States government tooth and nail as hard as they could, to the point where they were just being slaughtered by the United States government to prevent them from uprising. It was very, very strong-willed people. They didn't want their land taken away,
Mhm.
and I don't blame them. I mean, like I said, if I was to go over to my neighbor's house and be like, well, this is mine now. I discovered it. It
Mhm.
belongs to me because I'm better than you.
So there's another reason why they would justify taking the land is we even still have this in our culture in America now is land improvement. So because the work that the indigenous people were doing on the land was seen as, and I'm going to put this in air quotes, idle, as in not as in idle as in laziness, but as in like idle, like when your car is idling. It's a lot of work
Yeah.
to do nothing. The land isn't improved, but but you're working on it, right? So they would say, well, since the current inhabitants of the land are, quote unquote, idle, then we are doing a favor by taking it and improving it.
Yeah. And in turn, over the span of a couple hundred years, you destroyed it and created one of the largest famines and dust storm situations ever. Because you destroyed something that had been taken
Hey,
care of.
but
It was an
let's-
ecosystem.
Yeah, let's talk about a little bit about, because so far we have talked a little bit about like politics and religion and like that sort of setting in Europe, but we haven't really talked about that in North America. I don't know much about South America. I know like the Inca was like the word for emperor or something, but I can definitely talk about some of the various societies and civilizations in North America. Of course, the famous one is the Aztecs. Huge misnomer. They never called themselves Aztecs. What you had was the local population in Mexico were called the Mexica and spoke a language called Mexicahuatl. And the people we call the Aztecs were actually a conquering people that came in from somewhere in the north, which is rather ill-defined, but hey, you know. And they spoke a language called Nahuatl, and they came in and basically became something like a ruling class or an aristocratic class. As right of conquerors, they claimed the rulership over all of the local Mexica people. And these dynamics were, I wouldn't say they were the same as like aristocracy and serfdom, but it was not the rulership by consensus or leadership by consensus that, say, New England or something like that had among their native populations. There was definitely a very clear leader, a very clear aristocratic class. I mean, we all call Montezuma, it was the emperor of the Aztecs, right? So it was a close enough situation that the society mirrored that stratified. Well, it appears to all intents and purposes from the evidence that we have that the southeastern United States had the same or a very, very, very similar structure, in so much as there was a stratified society in these huge cities. Like some people call them the mound builders. Some people, I mean, technically they're called the Mississippian culture or the Southeastern ceremonial complex. But these huge cities, I mean, they had the mounds, and of course the aristocratic class lived on top of them, and I think they're called the paramount chief for the Southeastern ceremonial complex. But then they had huge open plazas in which they could play things like various like sports ball. I don't know what
sports ball.
Some sort of version of soccer or maybe lacrosse. I don't know, but whatever the local game was, and they could have huge ceremonies and gatherings. But then you had the average working person who was perhaps maybe a flint knapper or maybe a bow maker or a string or rope maker, and then you had hunters and stuff like that, and then you had the regular. I wouldn't say regular. I guess like the lower people, and they had a name. And I used to remember the name, but it basically meant commoner. So we have a similar social stratification if you look at it in an extremely zoomed out way as Europe had. Of course, as you learn about each culture, there's a lot of differences because those are more evident when you put the European understanding of the framework of society next to the North American one. So an example would be, there was a guy, and I can't recall his name right now. He was a Spanish conquistador, and he decided that he wanted to do the same thing like Pizarro and Cortez did in Central and South America. And so he went on an entrada across the southeastern United States. He landed somewhere in Florida, I think, and he took his whole ass army of conquistadors traipsing through the swamps up into North Carolina or South Carolina, and then
he
over
made it into
the mountains,
North Carolina.
the Appalachians.
This area of North Carolina that I live in, he actually made it into. There were a couple of forts that were built and everything back
You
in the
remember his
1500s.
name?
Hernan Cortez.
Yeah. No. It wasn't Hernán. He was the guy that went through.
I'm pretty sure it was Cortez.
Was it Cortez?
Yeah.
No, that's some different guy.
I don't
I'm
know.
sure
That's
of
what we
it.
got Google for. And if we
Okay.
don't get it right, somebody will correct
While you're
us anyway.
Googling, I'm going to go on with my with my intellectualizing. So he went through and he ran into this paramount chiefdom called Kofita Cheki. And in Kofita Cheki, the paramount chief was actually it was actually a queen, not whatever the girl version of chief is. Chiefess? I don't know. But
Chiefess.
the queen of Kofita Cheki was carried around on a litter, just like a king or a queen would be. She had servants and serfs and slaves and warriors and all of that. And the structure that I was describing of this really stratified society, and this conquistador goes through there, and he tried the same tactic of like demanding things from the emperor that they did it with that Cortez did with Tenochtitlan, and it didn't work quite as well. I think that Kofita Cheki was a little more resilient. They had also, by the time that he came through and saw Kofita Cheki, first of all, it was actually one of the few holdouts of that Mississippian culture, mound building culture. So they had a thriving city with mounds and everything. The other thing is that they had been exposed to, I think it was a Spanish shipwreck or something. So they'd actually been exposed to European diseases and gotten a fair bit of immunity before he rocked through there.
Hmm. Oh. Okay. It was not Cortez, obviously, because you just went through the whole thing about him going through Mexico and everything. So, yeah, not Cortez. It was De Soto.
Yeah, De Soto.
Hernando De Soto. And I guess that's why I got it confused, because they both had fairly similar first names.
Yeah,
But there's so many of them, it's just hard to keep track of all these Spaniards. I don't know.
I know.
But yeah, De Soto came through North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, Florida, Georgia, like that whole area, and ended up somewhere out in like Oklahoma or Texas before looping back into the Gulf. So explored a lot of the interior, met with a lot of different cultures, and was actually fairly peaceful with what he was doing. So had good encounters with the natives, I guess, for the most part. Built some forts here and there. Didn't stay in them long. There's one down near, not too far from here. There's a town called Old Fort, and
Probably,
I think it
let me
was
guess, named after his fort.
named after one of those. And then there's one that's actually being, it's down southeast of Marion, that's being archaeologically preserved right now. They're digging it up, and we're talking almost 500 years ago. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's kind of mind blowing how much time we've been here.
Yeah, but that's kind of the type of social stratification that you can see in like the American Southeast and in Mexico and Central America. But then as you move up north, like probably I like to think of it like whether there's deciduous trees or whether there's pine trees. When you move up into the pine tree area,
The
you've
real
got
north.
people like you mentioned, the Haudenosaunee, and that's the Iroquois Confederacy. They have a whole different system of government that has to do with oh goddamn consensus. Everybody has to agree 100%, which is mind blowing, because when is the last time you've ever been in a situation where every single person agreed 100%?
Never.
Exactly.
I'm pretty sure it's been never.
I've been in that situation once. I will.
Well, you were by yourself, probably.
Our time clock at work was like, I don't know, 20 minutes fast or something. So every time you punched in, you were quote unquote 20 minutes late, and the boss brought it up one day, and unanimously every single person was like, "Yeah, that's fucking bullshit. Change that." But that's the only situation in my life that I've ever seen.
If it benefits a large group of people, yes.
Yeah.
But no, it's like that. No, I don't want to go down that route. We'll save that for a different episode. I was just going to do like a Family Guy anecdote there, but no, we don't need a cutaway right now. But as you were mentioning, a lot of the southeastern civilizations and cultures that we had here, just in the United States alone, there is actually a theory, because like these mound builders were doing this before the Aztec civilization rose up. So there is a theory that they had migrated down into Mexico, where the Aztec civilization was at its peak by that point, because I think it's in Louisiana. There is a mound-built city that is pretty much almost exactly like an Aztec city. It's got the step pyramids built out of dirt. It's got the same ball courts, same layout as an Aztec city would be.
I've heard the theory that the Aztecs or Mayans had gone up north and made the mound cities, but I'd never heard the theory that they came from down south from here. That's interesting.
Why would they digress? Why would they go backwards? That, like, with their technological advancement, their architectural advancements that they had made, why would they just go, oh, well, we moved up into this area and we're going to build with dirt, even though there's plenty of stone in the area, sandstone, limestone.
That makes sense.
Southeast, and
I'm not arguing.
Easy. So why would they go downhill? That'd be like if the Egyptians, they started with the pyramids and then they just started scooping sand up like a sandcastle after that point. And they're just like, yep. Oh, we already built our great wonder of the world, so now we're just piddling around and farting around out here now. We can't top this. So that doesn't make any sense. Why wouldn't they improve? So to me, it makes sense that they moved from the north down into the south. Also, you're looking at a change in around that time of the world climate, temperature-wise.
Yeah, and then that huge drought too.
Yeah, so they're going to migrate down to where, well, they're going to follow the food. Your food can't grow here anymore, so they're going to move.
There are long established trade routes between the southeastern ceremonial complex and the central Mexico area. So it makes sense that they would just go like, well, that place that food comes from on our trade routes, let's go that way.
Yeah. Let's get closer to that. I mean, that makes sense. That's what all peoples have done all over the world for as long as we've been people. Mm-hmm. You go where the food is. Mm-hmm. You go where it grows. You go where the water is. You go where other people are.
You know what I want to do right now? I want to bust a myth. There's a myth that.
All right.
I was just talking about the trade route from central Mexico civilization area all the way up into North America and the southeastern ceremonial complex. There was There's a myth that the indigenous people didn't have any alcohol before Europeans showed up. They gave them alcohol and it ruined them, right? It's utter
Yeah.
bullshit. The Aztecs made beer out of corn, and it was such a popular drink they shipped it as far away as the Southeastern Ceremonial Complex and Pueblo people.
Yeah, I mean it makes sense. There's three things that a civilization would do as it first started out. They would farm, there would be prostitution, and there was alcohol.
Yeah.
All the major civilizations, like the second step after becoming a civilization, was to distill or brew alcohol. All of them. So it would just stand to reason that they would do it over here too. It's human nature to, eat, have sex, and drink.
So
We've
it's
been doing
also
it for
possible
thousands
that
of
the
years.
Timacoa from Florida, which lived around like these types of palm trees that you can collect the sap the way you do with maple syrup, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So you collect the sap, and if you leave it out overnight, it turns into like a wine. So it is possible that they may have been drinking that before Europeans showed up. But, of
Yeah.
course, we wouldn't know because the Europeans are the ones that wrote, and so they were
Yeah.
the ones that wrote.
We
They
brought
might have
them
taught them how to
alcohol.
do it. I don't know.
Like, we're the best drinkers in the world, and we taught them how to drink. I mean, like, even in, like, Amazonian cultures, there's certain plants that, like, grow and, what's the word? Ferment as they're growing. And you can just cut a leaf off of the plant and drink what's inside of it, and it's essentially alcohol
Oh, dang.
already, just coming straight out of the plant. You don't even have to do anything.
Yeah.
That's like a year ago would have been my wet dream to just go out in my backyard and cut down a plant and drink out of it. But yeah, it's a staple of civilization. You can't have civilization without alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to make alcohol out of what they have readily available. They figure out how to do it with anything. You can make alcohol out of anything that has sugars in it, you know. So most plants do. So whatever they have readily available, they've made their own form of alcohol out of it. That's good myth busting. And there's a lot of them out there, especially when it comes down to North American and South American civilizations, how everything went down with the Europeans coming in. I mean, you're right. The victors wrote history, and they really bastardized it and destroyed so much information and so much history we're never going to know. And that's a shame because we should. I mean, it makes sense that we don't know about 30,000 years ago. I mean, that makes sense. We don't even know about that in Europe and Asia and whatnot. We're still at arms about that. But what is a shame is that we barely know anything from even just 1,000 years ago, even 500 years ago. So that in itself is a shame. And we're taught here, especially in elementary school, at least it was in the early 90s. I don't know how it is now, but my experience in elementary school always just kind of put me off a little bit. I was like, a lot of this doesn't make any sense. So, you couldn't question it. And I guess really you still can't. So, I don't know. I guess that's kind of why we're here. We like to put this out there. And if it plants a seed in your head that's going to grow up into an 8-foot stalk of corn that says, hey, the people here before us were just as good, if not better. And we should have just
And we
let
really
them
want
alone.
that to happen. We want a big stalk of corn growing out of your head. Corn's good.
Yeah.
We like
Yeah,
corn.
I like corn. But yeah, I think we should probably wrap this one up. I don't know. You want to do a third part? Do you feel like we need to do a third part? I don't know. I kind of feel like we've really touched on a lot, even if it's sporadic and all over the place. I kind of feel like we've really covered the majority of what we need to on this topic, and we can move on to our next episode.
Yeah,
Or
I'd agree.
I think we've not necessarily covered all the bases, but you know what? We're just here just to kind of, as Mike put it out to me earlier, we're just like, nobody's gonna listen to a podcast when they can read a book. So you just want to hear our opinions on it. And maybe we're enlightening you to something that you didn't know. You can go ahead and go out there and research it yourself. There's tons of it out there. You just got to know where to look. And hopefully we can spur you into that and get you to investigate a lot of what we have talked about more on your own. And we would love to hear from you.
Hey, I would add, actually, on this topic, I have a list of books that I read to learn about this. If someone is interested, I can message them the list of books.
Yeah, I can always post it on Instagram and stuff too if people really, really want to get into that. But if you want to talk about us more with it, or just
it really is a fascinating topic, and the fact that we get so little of it for like what's supposed to be our nation's history that we learn in school just really made me very fascinated and curious about it.
Yeah. And me as well. I remember just as a child in school learning what I did learn and going, this just isn't right. This doesn't feel right. This doesn't sound right. So I ended up doing a lot of research into it myself, reading a lot of books about it, and, discovered a lot of things that I would have never figured out any other way. And nobody would have ever taught me this, because they just don't. So, like, go out there, make your own opinions. We're just here just to kind of just present what we feel and how we feel about it, and our knowledge of it as we understand it. And that's the great thing about human beings, is that we can share knowledge, but we can also look up knowledge on our own. So if any of you out there do want to get into contact with us, you can hit us up at on our Instagram. You can send us a message over there at Bermuda Boys Podcast, something like that. Just search it if you're not following it already. You can message either me. I don't know if Mike wants you messaging him or not, so I'm not going to throw him out there. But you can message me privately if you want to, and I'll try to get to you if I can. All my socials are out there, and most of you that listen already know. In the future, I guess I can't remember them all right now, so I'm not going to rattle them off. And we have an email also, if you want to send something a little bit larger, or like a voice file of something that you find interesting. If you want to record yourself saying something, or send us even topics for upcoming shows, would be great. Just reach out to us, get a hold of us, talk to us, interact with us. We would love to hear from you, and discuss things. This is what we like to do, is talk about stuff like this. So if you like that too, hey, you've got two people you can talk to right here. And if you want to be like a guest on the show, get a hold of us. We can try to get you on here as an honorable Bermuda boy for a day. We'll have a few guests coming up on future episodes. We've got some great guests lined up, and this show is definitely going somewhere. I know we took a hiatus there for a little while, but we're back, and we're going to keep doing it. And we both enjoy doing this very much. So stay tuned. We're going to have more great content coming, and not to like toot our own horn, but yeah, it's great. I like it. I like talking about it. I enjoy this very much, immensely. It's something that I look forward to. I get really excited about it. And I'll text Mike like earlier in the day. It's like, I'm excited. I'm ready to do this. And he texts back like, yeah, same. Like, I'm ready. So it's definitely something we enjoy, and I'm glad you guys could listen to our rambling and enjoy it with us. And I do hope that if it's not stuff you don't already know, that you do walk away from this show with a little bit of knowledge, or at least a thirst to look into it more yourself, or to even fact check us, or just yeah, if it just sparks you, just like spurs you in the motion of just, I'm gonna check this out more. Because obviously we can't touch on everything, but we can get as much as we can, and we're going to in the future. So Mike, I thank you for being here as usual. It would be the same without you, I guess.
You are very welcome.
And yeah, I guess we'll go ahead and close this one out, and we'll have a different topic to talk about next time. I don't know what it is yet, but it's going to be good. I know that. So thanks everyone for listening and hanging out with us while we do what we do. So Good day, good night, good afternoon, whenever you're listening to this. Goodbye.
This has been a Snackin' production. Your hosts today were Jack Sass and Mike Montrose. Music direction by Peepus Jones. Thank you for listening and your continued support.